Welcome to the SDA Housing Podcast, brought to you by NDIS Property Australia. Before starting this episode, we need to provide a general disclaimer. Information contained in this podcast is general in nature only. It does not take into account the objectives, financial situation, or needs of any particular person. You need to consider your financial situation and needs before making any decisions based on the information in this podcast. And you should consider seeking independent and professional advice for your personal circumstances. All right, let's begin.
Hello everybody, my name is Debbie from NDIS Property Australia, and you're listening to the SDA Housing Podcast, a show that explains, highlights, guides and brings awareness about all things SDA in this ever-changing NDIS world. I'm here with my co-speaker, Min. Hello, Min.
G'day, Deb.
Doing it a bit the other way around today.
This is the first time we've done a duo podcast, and you're the one introing the session.
Well, we got to change things up.
Yes.
So, Min, what are we talking about today?
A follow-up to our webinar 3 days ago. We had a webinar on calculating SDA ROI, return on investments, and it's been like 2 months since we've done a webinar, and it was really fun to talk about the numbers, number crunching, and all the things behind the scenes of SDA. And a lot of questions came out of that webinar, which were not relevant towards ROI calculations, but was in general about SDA itself. And we had Denise copy the questions down, and here we are with these questions to possibly go through most, if not all of them, as general questions that came out of the webinar. Yeah,
there were some really good questions, and yeah, we thought that we should address these as a really good episode topic to go through some general common questions people would want to know about funding, about tenancy, about all sorts of things related to the SDA property itself and the income and that kind of thing.
Yeah. We had 100 people register for the webinar, and 47 or 48 turned up to the event. I looked at our numbers on our podcast show, 74,000 downloads the last 3 years. So, why we're doing this episode today is because, look, there's more questions being asked. You can never get too bored with answering these questions, which are all sometimes pretty good. But a lot of our business coming in, Debbie, is from the podcast. Like everyone who comes to us now asking for advice, asking for feasibility consultancy work, asking for resale support to actually sell their empty house or built house. They're coming to us because of this podcast and better webinars. And we really appreciate all your support out there. Thank you so much for following us. And this is our way of giving back to you guys, our listeners, who have contributed towards the 75,000 downloads the last 3 years. So it'll be wonderful.
Yeah.
So where should we start, Debbie, with this?
Well, let's start at the top.
Well, first of all, before we go into these questions, let's talk about the webinar summary, just for 5 minutes.
Yeah, okay.
How did it go?
Oh, I thought it was great. So at first, when we were putting together the data, I thought to myself, this is going to be like 20 minutes over and done with and dusted. But we sort of,
an hour and a half.
It was an hour and a half. We managed to find a little bit more content that was very relevant. And as we started talking, we realized there was just so much to it. And rather than what we normally do in a webinar, which is let's leave the questions to the end, guys, we said, let's make this more interactive. So we'd cover a section and then go into all the questions relevant at that time. So it was a more interactive webinar than we normally do, which was great.
And I just said to Debbie, just before this show began recording, I said to Debbie, let's try and get back to our 2 shows per week on this podcast, because the SDA market sentiment may have dropped off a little bit from the overall high from 2-3 years ago. But we're still busy, Debbie. We're still busy with all the buyers and all the investors, all the sellers, the developers, the builders, the investors who want feasibility consultancy work. We're so busy because we have less competition or no competition. So less competition of selling agencies and groups, number one. Number two, less stock out there, and we have more control of stock ourselves. And number three, we're creating stock from scratch via our clients who are asking for development advice and development feasibility to help them create product to market. So our business has evolved a little bit for the better, to be less reliant upon sales and marketing per se, and more towards the advice and research side of it, which we really are enjoying doing more so, because it is an actual support to delivery of product to the marketplace for SDA.
And delivery of good product to the market.
So in saying so though, well, I had a lot of fun with webinar. Normally we see a drop off for people during the webinar, dropping off and just moving on. But because it was so interactive, Debbie, and it was
definitely. They all stayed.
Yeah, people love return on investments and returns, and throwing in random questions out, and it was really good. We really loved it. And this session today is, let's go through some of these questions that were asked, Debbie, and I'll start with the first one. What are the advantages of apartment compared to houses? Why do apartments have higher income? Will this come down in the future? Does OOA for apartments need to have a separate room for OOA?
Right. Okay. There's a few questions in there, and they're all very, very good. What are the advantages of apartments compared to houses? Lower entry point if you're a buyer. Only in most cases you're looking for a single occupant, a single tenant, which is easier than finding subsequent tenants in multi-dwelling buildings.
For example, in Sydney, to buy something in Parramatta or Penrith is $800,000. Build a house in Sydney is $1.8 million. Yeah.
Bit of a difference. Why do apartments have higher income? Don't know. We still are a little baffled by the funding for apartments versus houses versus villas, and why apartments have got the highest funding and why villas have the lowest funding. It's a little bit of a mystery, the explanations given by the NDIS in the funding review that came out in 2023, the 5-year SDA review. They did give a long explanation of everything that went into calculating those new incomes, and it still didn't really make sense as to why apartments were higher than the others.
But Deb, can I have a stab at the answer myself?
Yeah, sure.
Well, apartments are more so for one resident. So we're not seeing, we'll never see 2 or 3 residents in an apartment, obviously, right? So single living in the tenancy there. The cost of the construction of an apartment is between $800,000 to $1 million, which is true. So in order to justify the cost of an investment in an apartment of almost $1 million, one would think that the NDIS would have to allow for a high income like the 80 to 120 grand income range for that single occupant tenancy income. In contrast to a house where you're getting 2 or 3 tenants in a house. So again, most people are funded for 1 to 3 funding, shared funding in a house. 3 tenants is 40 to 60 grand each as an average. So 1 is 40, 50, 2 is 9 to 100, 3 is 150-ish. So I guess it's all about numbers. The cost to build or deliver an apartment to market is higher just for one tenant. And you can't, if you were to make apartment rent, income to be worth 50 grand, 60 grand, it's not worthwhile with less in an apartment. So I think that's my answer there, though.
Yeah, you're probably right. And I think it comes down to the ROI, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So there you go. The next part of that question, will this come down in the future? Very good question. Now,
may fluctuate, but
let's go back to 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, when the funding review came out mid-2023. And we actually saw massive changes in the funding levels, increases in funding across the board for improved livability and FA. And we saw, for houses and villas, and we did see a significant drop in funding for apartments. This was probably more of a correction because this was the first time they'd done a review of SDA funding after its inception. And I think it was a correction on levels that were at that point not realistic anymore. So yes, there's likely it may come down in the future relative to the cost of construction and investment. But I wouldn't think we'd see such a massive shift again. Because I think it dropped by like 20% apartments in general, whereas the increase in FA and IL funding for houses and villas were up by, in some cases, 150% or more.
Yeah.
Last part of the question, does OOA for apartments need to have a separate room for OOA? Do you want to answer that, Min?
No. That's my answer.
Yeah, but why?
Well, the OOA is a room, and that's normally in a room in the complex. So there's no OOA unit downstairs, normally a 1-bedroom studio apartment. Downstairs where the care team operate from 24/7. They might have 2 or 3 staff running around all day with one at base, and that one there is handling all the the buzzers and the what's the word?
The calls
The
from
calls from the individual apartments. Like they might be in an apartment, does the bell, and they run up because of the buzz, and they say, what can I help you with, and whatnot. So the OOA is not a person; it's a room, an actual room.
As opposed to in a house or a villa, it is not within the apartment. So it works in a bit of a different way in apartment complexes where you have on-site supports by one SIL team working out of an OOA, looking after a number of tenants in different apartments.
Debbie, on the topic of OOA, there's something I've learned last week, which I never knew, and I told you about this, and you were a bit shocked about this. We always thought it's 1 to 10.
In apartments, yeah, 1 OOA for every 10 apartments.
But after the first 10, it's 1 per 5.
Yeah.
Legislation shows if there's 15 units, right, 15 units and 2 OOAs, the first 10, in theory, is for 1, and the next 5 is for 1. So practically it'll end up being 7 and 1, 8 and 1.
But if you have 16 apartments, you'd need 3.
3. Or if you have up to 20.
Yeah.
10, 1, 5, 1, 5, 1.
Yeah.
And if you have 21 apartments, you need 4.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't realize this. This is little hidden facts within the legislation that you've got to dive deep into to find. I'm still to get a moment to look into that, but I do want to. But we've been told reliably that is the case.
I do want to sit down with you, Debbie, and probably Brad from Brighter Living, someone on the top in the future, to talk about the OOA topic in apartments. It's a very contentious topic at the moment.
Very contentious, very complicated, and definitely needs more conversation over.
Moving on, there was a question from Charles in the webinar. Charles says, does the location impact the funding?
Absolutely. So that's what the location factor is. On the SDA funding guidelines and the calculator, you will see the location factors, which are determined by the SA4, Statistical Area 4 of the location. And it also changes depending on the dwelling type and the number of residents. So an apartment might have a different location factor to houses in the same area, but it could vary. In most cases, it's going to probably vary by 0.9. So your median prices are based on 1 location factor of 1. It's multiplied by 1. But you'll have some locations where it drops down to 0.9 of the median funding, or it might go as high as 1.1. But there are certain areas that, in most cases, because they're either very rural, it's difficult to build in those areas, or they're in very expensive areas such as inner Sydney, where you could find that location factor goes as high as 1.9 in the case of like eastern suburbs of Sydney. So yeah, the location very much does impact the funding.
Yeah. Our next question is from Elena in the webinar. She asks, will the improvability category be phased out?
Very good question. We have heard about this for the last 12, 18 months in recommendations that the IL category be phased out. There was a lot of discussion at the time, a lot of concern at the time. What happens to all the IL properties? What is going to happen to all the IL funded participants? What we believed would happen is if there was a way that the NDIS found to do this, anyone currently in the system, any properties currently in the system would be grandfathered in at that level. But we still didn't kind of really know how they were going to do it. We do have a bit more clarity now on what's happening, and that is that they are just no longer giving IL funding approvals. So I guess that's how they're doing it. They're phasing it out in terms of the participants by no longer approving them for IL, but are pushing them straight up into either robust or FA. But in terms of the dwellings, any IL dwellings out there will be grandfathered into the system for the participants, still with IL funding. However, Min, what are your thoughts on future IL development?
It has caused a bit of concern from the investor market. So they buy beware, investor beware, tread carefully. Don't go out there and start building 10 IL apartments tomorrow. Please don't. Just be aware that there always could be changes. And
Yeah, at a base level, either go for robust or FA as a design type.
Next question is from Tim. Tim had a few questions here in our webinar. How is the funding changing as in the participants to carers, as in there used to be a lot of one-to-one funding previously? I have a robust under construction and it's designed for 1 robust participant per side in the duplex. Will I still be able to get participants on a one-to-one funding, or will that change?
Okay, so let's just talk about this in particular with robust. Yes, in general, the NDIS are more likely to approve funding on a share basis, 1-2 or 1-3, even in the case of robust. But we do know robust participants in general, the majority of them cannot share. Now, if they've got a good support team behind them who are writing the application to the NDIA to get the funding in the first place, hopefully if that participant has to live on their own, they've proven why in their documentation and the funding will be approved for 1-1. But we do know that a lot of the time the applications have not been put together correctly as per the number of cases that have to go back for review or go to the AAT. So a lot of people that should have 1-1 funding do end up with share funding.
So, Tim, expect the worst, which is 1-2 robust funding.
Or even 1-3.
Yep. And then that will have to fight for that 1-1 via a S48 change of circumstances. And also, on the topic of robust, as you know, Debbie, you and I have discussed in the past, they may be defaulted to 1-2 IL funding, shared funding, and you've got to fight to get the robust 1-1. So, because, Tim, 1-1 funding is about 90 grand.
Yeah, it's quite high funding for robust.
Yeah.
So,
and with that 1-1 90 grand SDA funding for robust, there's also probably 400-500 grand, 600 grand funding for care supports.
yeah.
So there's a lot of money to be given. As you know, the government wants to push back and cut costs, and they're going to make the onus on you, on the participant, to prove why they should get 1-1 funding.
Yeah, so we are seeing a lot more participants that should have 1-1 are not getting it, but then they are fighting for it and do end up being approved. So the chances are that you might end up with participants in each side with lower than 1-1 funding, but as long as their support team know what they're doing, hopefully they'll be able to change the funding level down the track, and you will end up with participants with the right funding.
Next question is from Woody.
Woody?
Can we build a house for 3 resident HPS and register it for only 2 resident HPS? And can that be changed back to 3 resident HPS in the future? Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
You can.
So this 3 HPS resident house can be registered, enrolled as a 3 resident HPS house, a 2 resident HPS house, a 2 resident HPS villa as well, or even a 1 resident villa. Because there's no such thing as a 1 resident house.
I think it would be a 2 resident villa, but it'd be a 1 resident villa if,
Yeah.
possibly. You know, there would be, I guess, some reasoning that the provider, because the SDA provider is the organisation that does enrol the property, they'd have to give reasons why it's being enrolled at that level.
Well, Debbie, some people cannot share with others. Like, even in the wheelchair, you cannot share.
And maybe they have 1 resident villa funding, but they've moved into a house because there's nothing else around in the area. So that would be a good reason for the property to be re-enrolled as a different dwelling type. So yeah, it's just a matter of enrolling it, whatever you want. It could be unenrolled and re-enrolled at a different level.
Yeah. Next question. How do we know the stats on the percentage of how many across HPS are funded 1-1, 1-2, 1-3? By Wendy.
No. Unfortunately, no. We have some fantastic data that comes out of the NDIS, but there's also massive gaps in really important information. And this is one of them.
Sure. Next question from Tim again. Can I split the duplex to 1 SDA provider per side and another SDA the other, given whoever presents it on participant first? Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess they would both be enrolling each individual side of the duplex.
Yeah. Next question. Salma. As an SDA investor, what kind of support can we get from the governments?
From in terms of the investment,
SDA, and that's it.
And getting into the investment, nothing until you actually have tenants in place and you're getting the funding.
Yeah, no grants or anything like that.
Nothing.
Next question, Niraj. If in a HPS house, 1 participant is HPS funded at 90K and another participant is funded at IL 50K, will the total cost funds received be 100K due to the lesser overall, or is it 140K?
Okay, well, it depends on what that funding is. If it is a 2-tenant HPS house and that 90K is the 2-tenant HPS funding, that will be paid. And if you have that second participant in who is an IL participant funded at 50K, which is probably for 3-tenant, that's what's paid is in their plans, as long as it is not more than what the house is enrolled for, if that makes sense. So you would get the 140K, not the 100.
If it was enrolled for 1 to 2.
That's right. If the house was enrolled for 1 to 3 and that participant had 2 resident funding for HPS, that would not all be paid because the house is not eligible to get that funding. If it's 1 to 3, it's about, I think,
50-ish.
60,000 HPS.
Yes.
So you'd only get whatever that level is in that location for the HPS and the IL funding in addition to that.
Yeah. Next question from Charles again. Is there a difference between carers and OOA?
Well, yeah. The carers are the carers. They're the actual people that look after the participant or participants. The OOA is literally the room.
Yep.
It is an office essentially for the care team on the premises.
Moving on from Tim again. Location factors. If an area have a 1 plus, as a 1.00 plus factor when you build, could it be a change to a 0.88 factor in the future? If so, what will change?
Okay, this again goes back to that 5-year funding review. We did see location factors change, but I don't imagine it would change that much. Yes, it could change, probably not massively. Also worth knowing though, when those 5-year reviews come through, the new prices and the new location factors are relevant for properties built from that time on. So whatever the location factors are and the funding is when your property was enrolled, remain. So it won't change, no.
Next question from Tim again. What's the overall vacancies in percentage per dwelling? I heard it's increasing, especially in some oversupplied areas.
I'm not sure and I said this on the webinar, I'm not sure what the current vacancy rate is. You were thinking it was more about 15%, Min.
Well, the Housing Hub annual report in October last year says across the market is about 15-ish%. Look, there is no, to answer your question, there is no answer out there. There's no stat to show that.
And yes, it's going to be far higher in oversupplied areas, obviously. I think what's important to understand, though, is we're not talking about vacant houses. We're talking about vacant places. So you'll find that even if that vacancy is a significantly high number, say it's 15%, say it's 12%, whatever, we're talking about 12% of rooms in all SDA properties being vacant, not 12 or 15% of houses or apartments or villas being vacant.
Next question from Wendy again. When interviewing potential SDA providers, do you need to then ask what participants and their funding are on their books as well as what participants and their funding are on their wait list?
You can ask, but I don't think you're going to get an answer.
Because the lack of information is going to show how weak they are as a business. And number 2, it's confidential information. Number 3, you could be a competitor trying to sniff out their books and try and steal business. So it's going to be hard to get that kind of information from a business like that. Question again from Buddy. As the supply increase, will these funding come down drastically? Already there are suburbs with oversupplies.
Again, this comes down to the 5-year pricing review. That's the only time that the funding will change. Every year it goes up by CPI, but, different levels of change. Look, yeah, given the oversupply in some areas, there may, the next funding review, be a decrease in funding in oversupplied areas. I know that is potentially one of the factors that go into determining what those funding levels are in each location. So, yes, they could come down. I wouldn't say drastically, but again, it's only going to then be applicable to any new builds coming on after that date.
Cool. From Tim. A dumb question, but if a new building comes online in 2024, does that funding keep changing from year to year completely? Say 2025, it gets reduced, or does your original remain in place plus CPI increases?
Exactly as my previous answer, your funding just increases by CPI. It does not change. It does not get reduced.
Okay. Next question from Thomas. Do you have an indication from SIL providers as to which areas and type of dwellings are most in demand?
Yes, we do in some areas where we have good connections with SIL providers or with SDA providers with good SIL connections.
But there's no market data survey to show what is in demand in areas.
No, it's literally just word of mouth.
But you know what, Debbie? I mean, if they looked at the public supply and demand information and also the quarterly reports from NDIS, NDIA every quarter, you can see what's in that area. You can see what is already there. You could sort of gauge the numbers as to what's, is needed for the area. So The process of, deduction and calculations and averages is my answer. Yeah. You can.
Yeah. And look, just one of our little secrets I'm giving away in terms of our data reporting is looking at how many properties in the area are older style, the existing and the legacy. That will give you a good indication of whether the demand is higher or not. If it's all new build, probably lower demand or lower need because you've got a good supply. But if the supply existing is older style, then the chances are that that's an area of more demand.
Next question from Tim. How do you know if an inquiry is genuine for your NDIS house, as in potential tenant or just nothing? Since the SDA, when asked to clarify, will not answer that for me.
That's an odd question. I'm not quite sure what you're getting at, Tim. You've had...
As in a non-genuine applicant?
Yeah. Well, I guess you need to ask what their funding level is and how much it is. And if they can't tell you that, then it probably is not a serious inquiry. I'm not quite sure why an SDA would tell you that they've got an inquiry that's not genuine. Maybe they're just trying to make it sound like they are working harder than they are. Look, that will be the most important thing. If you've got a query, an inquiry for tenancy, how much is their funding? What is their funding level? If they're serious, if it's genuine, they'll be able to tell you that.
Next question. Feedback from people. Who's from Vasco? Hello, Vasco.
Hello.
We had a video call with Vasco yesterday. He was on our webinar. Been on several webinars now, and he booked a session with us yesterday to do some consultation on his development site. Yeah. Feedback from people that have this. State the vacancy period is approximately 1 year. I was told there are shortages, so why so long?
Okay. Vacancy period. We know that it generally, on average, takes 6 to 9 months to fill your property. And that's probably extending out now in terms of a second and a third tenant. But your first tenant, you would hopefully get in within 6 months. Yes, that is the case despite there being shortages. It's all about the location. Obviously, where there is less supply, you're going to have potentially participants moving in quicker. Where there's an oversupply, it'll take longer to find your tenants. Just comes down to supply and demand.
More question. Tim again. How do we find out these areas as the NDIS demand map is outdated and not accurate, and communicating directly with the NDIS provides no joy?
Provides no joy. Yeah. Well, look, the NDIS demand map is updated roughly every few months, as is their data. So, yeah, it's outdated. When it comes out, it's about 6 weeks old, but then you don't get another issue for 3 months. So by the time, like now, we are in the second week of Feb, the new data will be out in a week as of the end of December. So currently the data we're working with in February is from the end of September. That's pretty old, out-of-date data. We don't have anything better. There is no more updated information. So as of next week, we will know information that is only 6 weeks old. That's the best we can do. And you're not going to get any joy out of the NDIS on more clearer information, I'm afraid.
Next question. Please provide the list of oversupplied areas. Lindy Raj.
Okay. Basically, we have a fabulous report on our website produced by our data scientist, Lenore, that is called the Over-Under Supply Report. Please go to our website, go to reports, ebooks, and you can download it. And it will give you a glimpse every SA4 area in Australia, and whether it's oversupplied, undersupplied, or sort of on par with what it needs to be.
Cool. Our last question from the webinar was from Eddie. Can SDA providers enter into early agreements once they say development approval is attained?
Maybe. Probably not.
There's a provider management agreement with the investor. In theory, you can.
Yeah. Not likely.
I mean, it doesn't do anything.
Yeah.
And
you're not likely to get a provider who will go into a management agreement at that point. They're going to certainly want to see the site under construction.
Don't go to market and assess the market demand.
Yeah. And
also, Eddie, why would you tie yourself up with one provider before construction even began when you may have chosen the wrong one? You want to suss out who the ideal providers are to engage to work with to give you the best chance of occupancy on all your SDA rooms. place?
I mean, I know it's kind of counterintuitive because you would think, well, let's connect with an SDA provider. They've got the clients who need the housing. Let's work with them and build the right kind of housing. It just doesn't work that way, unfortunately, because by the time you've got a development off the ground, that could be 18 months, could even be 2 years from start to finish. Those participants have long since found homes. They're not waiting around that long. And so you're going to be looking for new tenants who've recently, or new participants who've recently come into the system. So, yeah, it doesn't really work that way.
Cool. That wraps up our questions from the webinar. Yeah.
Yeah, look, that was some fantastic questions, and I hope that that gave all of you a little bit more understanding of some of the different issues, some of the different, it's just such a complex area, and that hopefully made things seem a little bit more understandable for you.
Deb, can we ensure that when we publish this episode, we actually have the link to the YouTube or Vimeo account video?
Yeah, we can do that. So
people can watch the webinar.
Please do jump on and watch that webinar. It was a good session.
Yeah. I think last year, Debbie, we were doing like one webinar a month and one podcast a week. What I'd probably like to see us do this year is more go back to maybe 2 podcasts a week and one webinar every 2 months.
Yeah. We'll see how things pan out, though.
But
in our rapidly changing business.
Yeah, the market's changing. So what stock coming in all over the place, which is good and average. Lending changes there. More collaboration with providers who want to get involved with the work we do. More investor developers who are asking for advice and seeking advice on designs and locations and viability. But I want to raise something now. Vasco was on our podcast webinar the other day, Debbie, and we had a video call with him yesterday. And he thought, just get a report, a data report, and that should be fine to justify and proceed with his project or not. And it sounds correct, I guess. But during the conversation with him for that 45 minutes, we realized that he didn't realize, because he thought, just the villas, one long dwelling, long house. And then 4 villas in there, and then an OA in each room, right? And we said to him, hang on, no. You don't need an OA in every one of the villas.
This is not necessarily the right design you've got here.
And he'd already spent 150 grand on site works and design and DA and all that stuff. So again, look, commending him, great work for what he's done, yes. But again, there's always a little things in the big plan, the concept plan, the big project, which can be improved upon. And the suggestion I gave him was, well, have an OA room unit separate to those 4 in the dwelling and keeping that additional room in there as a spare room.
Spare multi-purpose room in each dwelling.
In the individual villas. So again, we're here to help. We're here to advise. If you have any questions from your sites or your projects or need help with marketing, procurement, support to find participants or find a provider, please reach out to us. We're here to help. And this is a good session. I really love going back to these basic questions, which are very generic, I guess, Debbie. And also, should we add some of these questions to our FAQs on our website as well, do you think?
We might have a look at that.
Yeah. So I'll be, please send us any questions you have, and we'd love to add you on our podcast if you're an investor, good or bad experience.
We love answering questions.
Yes, that's all we do here. Crunching numbers, answering questions, and trying to give back to the community here. So we've hit 74,000 downloads. I think we'll be hitting, the more podcasts we do, Debbie, the more downloads we'll get. So hopefully I want to see us hit 100,000 downloads by the next year or year.
Not yet. Year.
Yeah.
For sure.
In theory, we've done, 3 years podcast?
We're pretty much bang on our 3-year anniversary, actually.
Yeah.
I think it was the first or second week of Feb.
25,000 per year, downloads per year. So if we can do another year, we'll hit 100,000 there.
Yeah.
Cool.
I reckon we'll hit that. But thank you so much for listening to all these questions. I hope that you got some good information out of them, some good answers that you might also have been asking. More questions, hit us.
Not too much.
Metaphorically speaking.
Thank you, Debbie. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Min. Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please make sure you are subscribed and following us so you can keep in the loop with all of our upcoming episodes. We would really appreciate it if you could leave us a 5-star rating, a written review, and to share this podcast with those that could benefit. Until next time, catch you on the next episode.